I'm speaking with Chloé Brayne, Head of Private Equity and Unlisted Assets at CFS. Chloé, welcome to the Inside Networks Alternatives Symposium at Cape Schanck.
Thank you, James.
Great pleasure to have you here. Chloé, thematic investing has gained a lot of traction across private markets in recent years. Which themes do you believe are most durable within unlisted assets and why?
We particularly look for themes that we think are going to require long-term capital investment and are really going to outlast the cycle. So things that we could look at are decarbonisation, for example. We're seeing a lot of tailwinds, particularly around energy requirements. From infrastructure, that could mean interconnectors, it could mean grid connection investments, it could also mean renewables, obviously depending on the geography. We also look to demographics, so that often means aged care from a structural trend. We see a lot of opportunity for that across private equity, across infrastructure and also across property. From an infrastructure perspective, it could mean mid-market investment into hospitals, patient transport services, anything that has long-term stabilised cash flows. From a property perspective, we're seeing a real drive of a gap in the market. There's a demand for seniors housing, particularly in geographies like the US. So we see, again, the demographics theme really coming through strongly there. And from private equity, we think that there's a lot of opportunity, particularly in health tech businesses that are servicing the needs of an ageing population. The other thematic I would say as well is also digitisation. That's a really big theme. Obviously, we're all talking about AI. We're seeing that play through the portfolio in a number of different ways. Again, whether from an infrastructure perspective, you're looking at data, you're looking at automation, you're looking at data centres to support that. Property, again, you're thinking about opportunities like powered land, which ultimately go into supporting data centres. And from a PE perspective, you're thinking about businesses that are able to integrate software and AI improvements into their business model and drive either better revenues or improvements in margins.
How should advisors distinguish between those more definite long-term structural themes and those that are more cyclical and sentiment-driven?
I think the key thing is identifying those thematics that you think will last through the cycle versus something that really is just a valuation narrative. We see a really good example of that, again, with opportunities such as ageing populations in infrastructure. You can really see that demographic factor driving through and obviously needing long-term capital investment versus, say, for example, tech valuations. We saw a real peak of those and a huge increase in those between 2020 to 2024. And I think, often a lot of that, particularly around AI, is being driven by sentiment rather than actually anything underpinning and any structural force underpinning those valuations. We think, therefore, that advisors need to make sure that they're looking to work with managers that have been able to deliver returns and distributions, importantly, through a cycle and see evidence of that. We also think that you need to be careful around policy risk. There are certain areas and certain geographies where we're seeing heightened policy risk. That's a really big one to flag.
What role do unlisted thematic exposures play alongside listed markets in building diversified client portfolios?
We think that unlisted assets provide really important resilience for client portfolios. Again, they provide a longer term view and a longer term outlook on key thematics. I think the other thing, obviously, is that private assets don't always get listed. Sometimes they sell to other strategics as they keep growing. They don't always enter the public market space. And so being able to access those assets and include them within a portfolio for diversification reasons is very important.
Chloé, what are the really key research challenges that advisors face when they're assessing thematic private equity and unlisted strategies?
I think the first one would be manager dispersion, particularly in private markets. I think between 2000 and 2019, we saw up to 14% dispersion between bottom quartile and top quartile managers. And that's a really big gap. You don't see the size of that gap in public markets. So what that says is that ultimately you need to make sure you're choosing the right managers and you're getting execution certainty on their strategy. From a diligence perspective, that practically means really leaning into understanding the manager's strategy, how they deliver on it, what is their track record of delivering to that strategy, has it been repeated, What about the team? Team stability in delivering exactly that same strategy. How have they exited? How do they deploy capital? I think they're all really important factors, and probably the last one I would add on is just operational expertise in that strategy. What is that manager doing that is different to other managers to get in and drive value in their assets?
From an implementation perspective, what should advisors be most mindful of when allocating to thematic unlisted assets, particularly around areas such as pacing, liquidity and client expectations?
I think liquidity is first and foremost one of the considerations, particularly in thematic investments. If you are playing into thematic areas, sometimes it can take a while for value to come through. Clients will need to remain patient and very consistent with their approach. And so ensuring that clients have a good understanding of what that liquidity means within their portfolio is critical. From that perspective, you can either choose evergreen strategies, but they come sometimes with a cost to returns, they come with higher fees. They're important things to dig into. Again, in addition to the points I mentioned earlier around diving into and diligencing managers. However, from a closed-ended strategy perspective, obviously there are challenges around drawdown, return of capital, length of a period. And so I think, finding strategies that are complementary to help mitigate effects around J-curve, that can be done through secondaries programs, co-investment programs, and combinations of either buyout or also evergreen strategies, I think are really good ways to think about mitigating risk around illiquidity.
Chloé Brayne of CFS, thank you very much for your time.
Not a problem. Thank you, James.